Welcome, ladies and gentlemen of the old world. I hope you guys are all doing well, and today, my friends, we're back with a power level comparison. So we're going to be taking a look at all of the Dark Elf lords, including the basic lords this time around, and comparing them from best to worst in multiplayer. So again, this video is going to be focused on multiplayer, perhaps somewhere down the road, once I play a little bit more campaign. Most likely in Game 3, we can start touching on more campaign topics outside of Let's Plays and whatnot, but for now, we are going to be going in on the good old multiplayer. So for the Dark Elves, no big surprise here. The most powerful lord in multiplayer, in my opinion, is going to be Big Mama Morathi, and she just brings so much to the table. Firstly, as far as her kit goes, very fast with 105 speed, a good bounce option, great armor piercing, anti-large, charge bonus of 85. Even though she might seem a little bit squishy in combat, that's really quite deceiving. Yeah, she has 3,400 HP, only 40 armor, but she has the Enchanting Beauty, which gives -9 melee attack, and then she also has an item which is very good called the Heartrender and the Dark Sword, which around her in an effect range of 40 meters lowers melee defense and melee attack by 9. So pretty much anyone that's near Morathi is going to have -18 melee attack, which is insane. So she can go from a duelist situation where somebody's like has a massive amount of melee attack against her melee defense, but suddenly not so much, and it's really powerful. And honestly, Dark Elves playstyle in general, at the highest level of competitive play, pretty much revolves around Morathi Soul Stealer debuff blobs, right? It's incredibly strong. And also, she's got Lore of Darkness. She does have a mixed Lore of Magic, so she has Doom and Darkness and Soulblight, which can be okay. But really, I mean, in most situations, you're just going to bring Soul Stealer. You're going to bait them into a blob fight. You nail them. You pull back. You rinse. You repeat. You rinse. You repeat. And the blob fights usually go good for you, right? Because Morathi is going to be lowering the melee attack of nearby units by 18. So yeah, just really powerful. Again, I think she's like, if you really go to the min-max perspective of the Dark Elves, I can't see another Dark Elf Lord really holding a candle to Morathi. I think at a time, Malekith was probably considered to be kind of on par with Morathi, depending on the matchup. But this was before dragons kind of got nerfed inadvertently by the mass changes. Now, if you come in with a dragon, it's often going to get trapped. Even if you go in and Soul Stealer, it's much harder to get away. Whereas before, the dragon could fly in, it could Soul Stealer, of course, it had breath attacks, but it could get out a little bit easier, right? It could push through certain things, but now it's really tough. Dragons get pinned in super hard. So Malekith has fallen from probably being tied for the first place spot here. And Big Mama Morathi, Mama's bringing it home. And yeah, she is a great character. She also has the Wand of Caridon, which is awesome. Arcane Conduit, you know, she can drop little Doom Bolts, which make her a pretty good duelist. If she's like going fisticuffs with another caster lord who's not super tanky, you can drop the wand on their head with Soul Stealer and you can like just instant shot them. It is quite good. Very easy to dodge, but if used correctly and timed correctly, it can be something that is very impactful. So again, in my opinion, Morathi is the strongest lord choice for the Dark Elves. And now we'll go on to the next strongest choice, which is going to be kind of a general category. The Supreme Sorceress. So if you're in a tournament, you're playing a best of 3 versus a high-level Dark Elf player, typically you're going to see one of two things, either Morathi or you're going to be seeing a Supreme Sorceress. Basically, in matchups in which Soul Stealer isn't good, you're going to be seeing a Supreme Sorceress, either of, typically Fire is one of the most common ones, against like Vampire Coast and against factions with low leadership. Typically, Burning Head is like probably one of the best abilities or spells in the game. So it lowers leadership, it does massive damage, it's not terribly expensive on the Winds of Magic. So I would say the Supreme Sorceress is probably the second most often picked lord for the Dark Elves in multiplayer, and rightfully so. Like a Supreme Sorceress, for example, let's go ahead and look. If we go to Fire, you put them on just like a Hellsteed so they can get around the battlefield. You bring them with just Burning Head, and it's pretty cheap. It's only 1,345 gold here. You get the Burning Head, the Arcane Conduit, and a pretty fast mount option. You can put them on a Dragon or on a Manscore. Sometimes you see the Manscore, but generally you see them on the Dark Pegasus or on the Horse. And if you go on the Horse, it's only what, 1045 gold? It's really, really cheap. So again, I think the Supreme Sorceress is a very cost-effective, cheap lord choice. And in this video, we're not talking about, just remember, we're not talking about lords like, oh yeah, Malekith versus Supreme Sorceress in a fight. Yeah, of course Malekith would win. Rakarth would even win. We're talking about cost-effectiveness in multiplayer and adding these lords into your builds and getting the most bang for your buck. So that is what we're here to talk about. And again, it's kind of a generalization because if I were to rank every Supreme Sorceress by its Lore of Magic, the video would get a little bit redundant, but probably Lore of Fire and Lore of Death are some of the more common ones in conjunction with Lore of Beasts, probably kind of following up just for the Manscore summon. So again, Morathi, then the Supreme Sorceress. And going on to the number 3 pick, it feels good. We got Malekith the Witch King. So Malekith is, despite the nerfs to the dragon, he still can be pretty viable on his cold one. He's got a pretty decent little duelist kit. If you put him on his cold one, he's got 110 armor, good leadership, and good blob punishing too, even more so than Morathi actually, because If you really go with his magic here, you give him just Soul Stealer, which is pretty much what everyone, their dog and third cousin does. You can then also use his Gaze of Malice, which is a free bound ability, which is really good for clearing out chaff. So if he's surrounded by like spears or halberds or something like that, it can knock them over, allow him to escape, and also do really substantial damage. It has 3 charges too. So Malekith, obviously a little bit more of a bruiser type character. You can still bring him on the dragon, and it can be made to work. But again, dragons are just such a precarious thing right now because of the mass changes. And I do think the mass changes were very good in many ways. It made factions like dwarves a little bit more reasonable, not just getting run over by chariots all day, and kind of punishes cycle charging a little bit. But yeah, the dragon nerf really kind of put him down there. But again, Malekith has got Soul Stealer. He's got, you know, a decent mount option via the cold one. You can also go on the lizard limo. And as far as his items go, Destroyer is okay. Circlet of Iron and the Supreme Spell Shield are both pretty much god-awful. So typically, the kit you're going to see on Malekith is Soul Stealer and just using his free bound spell via the Gaze of Malice. And that's pretty cost-effective. He usually does very well. And again, that used to be kind of the Dark Elf meta way back in the early days of Warhammer 2. You would see Malekith with Soul Stealer, and then you'd see him with Gaze of Malice. He'd fly into a blob fight with his dragon, he'd pop Soul Stealer and Gaze of Malice, nuke the blob, and then you would win it, right? If you time it properly with Murderous Prowess, it can be very cost-effective. So Malekith is still okay. He's definitely the number 3 choice in my opinion. You don't see him picked too often behind the Supreme Sorceress and Morathi, but he gets in there occasionally. I've seen a couple Dark Elf players use him on the cold one in a couple matchups. I think I remember seeing him in the Empire matchup there, but nonetheless, Malekith still does work, and if you really like him as a character, he's not going to steer you wrong. You can basically use him in a very similar fashion to Morathi on his cold one, or even on his dragon, and you'll probably be fine, more or less. But that is going to be it. So next up, after Malekith, I think the next lord on the list is going to be the Crone Hellebron James. So I was kind of torn between Crone and the next choice on the list. Not going to spoil it quite yet, but yeah, I feel like they could kind of be interchangeable depending on the matchup. But Crone, she's got her a Manticore mount, which she has good armor, piercing, and poison, a relatively reasonable duelist. And again, if you put Crone on a different faction, like if the Beastmen had Crone, they'd probably be happy, right? She's got the Cauldron of Blood mount, which is okay. It's not the best kind of, it can't hold a candle to Volkmar the Grim, but nonetheless, like, there are some very weird and niche builds you can do with her. I wouldn't call them like competitive per se, but they can be like a surprise build where you go in, it's so off meta and so different that you can actually win games off that alone. But she has the Gaze of Cain, which is a really good buff. It buffs melee attack by 24, base weapon damage, and armor piercing weapon damage. So you can use this on like a murder blob of like Witch Elves or even like basic Bleak Swords, Corsairs, and it can make them pretty nasty. On top of that, Witcher's Brew, Heroic Killing Blow, and Blood Frenzy, all decent. And the Cursed Blade is kind of like a Walmart Mortis Engine effect that can do damage over time. It doesn't heal, so it's not quite as good as a traditional Mortis Engine. And the Amulet of Darkfire is whatever. Probably not worth it. It's really expensive. It costs 210 gold. But generally, she has okay items with the Cursed Blade. Some decent mount options with the Manticore and the Horse. And even Foot Hellebron can do some okay work. But I feel like she enables certain weird playstyles that other lords can't. And that makes her kind of viable enough to be better than the next choice on the list, which is going to be Lokhir Fellheart. Now, Lokhir is generally considered to be quite terrible. He has like the terrible variant of regeneration via the Helm of the Kraken, which only regenerates when he's in melee, whereas like Boris Todbringer and Volkmar the Grim heal out of combat, which basically just makes them actually good. And if Lokhir's Helm did the same thing, he would be like a much better lord, exponentially better, but it only heals when he's in melee, which is not when you really need it. Oftentimes you get punished, you need to pull back and heal, so it's kind of like a little bit unfortunate. Now, Lokhir and his dragon, generally pretty god-awful in multiplayer. Still very fun to use. For his abilities, he has Foe Seeker, Dreaded Duelist, Deadly Onslaught, and Merciless Slaver. Merciless Slaver is pretty bad, but it only costs 69 gold. That's what she said. So, you can bring it occasionally, depending on the matchup. But the reason why Lokhir isn't lower on this list, and why he's actually higher than some other lords you may be kind of considering right now, is because he's actually okay in a couple matchups. If you're looking to bring a character in a matchup and you're worried about him getting sniped, for example, and you need someone durable, high armor, decent in combat, can defeat enemy lords on foot, Lokhir is actually not bad against like Vampire Coast. You can bring him against Vampire Coast and against dwarves, and he can sometimes do okay. He gets in there, he regenerates against their kind of light melee damage that they have, and he can actually put some hurt on their lords, and basically he's just dirt cheap, right? If you bring him with his kit here, just bring like the Dreaded Duelist, for example, he's only 1300, so he's got a couple matchups where I've seen high-level players actually bring him and have success, whereas the next lords on this list are pretty much, I would say, not often good, or not ever good, really. Lokhir can be like, okay, it's a healing X Factor, he's in your lines. He's kind of like, okay, best way to describe this, he's Walmart Sigvald. He is Walmart Sigvald, right? Sigvald is, shielded and just better in combat and constantly heals, more or less unbreakable. He's like Walmart Sigvald. So you can see why he has some relevance, right? Anyways, next choice, we're going back to the basic lords here. It's going to be the High Beastmaster. So the High Beastmaster isn't great. Overall, the Scourge on a Chariot Mount is very underwhelming. The man score isn't bad, though. He does get anti-large and can whiplash himself and do some decent work. But the only reason why the High Beastmaster isn't towards the bottom of the list is because he has one little item, which has always been a balancing issue in this game. He has the Tormentor Sword. So he has a snare. And snares are like one of the best things in the entire game. So he's pretty terrible overall, but the fact that he has a Tormentor Sword brings him back up to a feasible level where you can actually use him. And because Dark Elf monster builds just aren't good, right? So Hydras and Charybdis are generally pretty haggard. There's a couple of situations. So the Whiplash isn't even that useful, except for like Alpha Striking. But yeah, the High Beastmaster, he has a Tormentor Sword. I don't know what else to say. The Whiplash is okay and the Beast Slaver is okay, but yeah, he's got Tormentor Sword. That's pretty much it. So next up, we have your boy Malus Darkblade. So Malus obviously has some huge issues with the mechanics of his Zarkan. I pretty much went on a huge rant about this last time I had him on the channel, so I'll kind of keep it a little bit more condensed here, but basically you're paying a very high price point. If you bring Malus with his item, which is very good, his item does actually give him healing, and I believe it actually gives him some general ward save of 5%, right? So it's a good item. If you bring Malus with his full kit, he is $23.45. That is super expensive. The reason why he's so expensive is because you're paying for his other half. You're paying for Zarkan as well. Now, if we go in and look at the Best Lord, for example, let's get Morathi on her mount here. We can bring, the ideal kit. We can cut this, and go to Soul Stealer and get the Heartrender and the Dark Sword. Morathi on her steed with her Lore of Magic and her Soul Stealer and all of her debuffs costs 2,100. Malus costs 23, plus then you have to bring a caster. So your army is going to be substantially weaker than if it were with a character like Morathi, who honestly is probably better in combat than Malus with her debuffs and her Soul Stealer. She also brings the magic, right? So you're paying a massive price point for him. On top of that, when you bring the price point, he just basically outs himself. When he's in his demon form, he slowly takes damage over time, which I think is the stupidest thing ever. Basically, you're in a multiplayer game, and again, we're talking about multiplayer. In campaign, it sucks too, because like you don't want to pop it in battles, because if it ends up being long, you lose your legendary lord, which sucks. So in multiplayer too, it's also terrible, because what happens is you pop it, your opponent sees it, they see the bounce power go in your favor, they're like, all right, I'm just going to run. I'm just going to kite him. He only has 66 speed. His Velociraptor Spite is like, in the books, is supposed to be like the fastest cold one in the realm, and he's rocking like 68 speed. It's so stupid. He can't catch anyone, like no one. He just waddles like a potato and just withers to dust. If your opponent obviously sits and fights with him, yeah, he can be pretty amazing, but that never happens. That never happens in the higher levels of play, even the mid levels of play. It's disappointing. Malus is situationally okay in one or two matchups. I've seen him do okay in like the Tomb King matchup, in matchups where the enemy faction isn't very fast and he can actually stick on the target. Then he can be okay. If you're against a slow faction who's not mobile, their lords aren't mobile, and Malus can sit on them in demon form, it can be pretty scary. But again, I would call Malus at best extremely niche. He's overpriced. His demonic form is just terrible, and it's really a shame, because mechanically, like, I really like the idea of like having this alternate form, but like they could like tune it down too. They could just like make him a little bit weaker with his abilities and make his demonic form not wither him down. Or there could be some way where he can like switch back and forth, which would be really cool. With like a 30-second cooldown, you could switch to Zarkan, then you could switch back to Malus. And with a cooldown or some sort of restriction, there's a lot of ways you could fix that. But again, this video isn't about fixing Malus, but it kind of is. But yeah, a little bit disappointing. It's a shame, because he's so cool. He's got a whole book series named after him. So next up after Malus, we have the most recent addition to the Dark Elves. And I played him for a kind of good week after he came out in competitive games, trying to make him work, but honestly, he's just not good. Rakarth is just, his abilities aren't that useful, right? Like the Beast Lord's Gaze, okay, leadership and rampage. The only things you have that really rampage are Dread Knights, which aren't really that good and used in the meta. Cold One Chariots, which are kind of niche as well. And, of course, some of the monsters, you can be made to rampage by enemy factions, right? But it's really just not very good. He's got Beast Slaver and Whiplash, and on top of that, he can get in there and really do crazy damage. That's the one redeeming factor about Rakarth, is if you put him on his dragon, you Beast Slaver and Whiplash himself, his weapon strength's like 900 or something insane with anti-large, and he can pretty much take on anyone in a straight up fisticuffs fight. But again, he's a dragon character. It's so all in. Like, you're paying a huge price point at 2,600. The Beast Armor of Karenkar is okay. It gives ward save and melee defense. Really not bad. And the Whip of Agony is also quite okay. It lowers melee defense, but for some reason it can't target lords and heroes, which really is stupid, because like that would make him okay if he could like debuff enemy lords and punish them. But he can't target lords and heroes with the Whip of Agony, which is really silly for sure. But generally, he's just super overpriced. His abilities are subpar, and you know, again, High Beastmaster has this Tormentor Sword. He doesn't. He's really an all-in character, which a couple situations can kind of work with it, but also another variable is that this really kind of contradicts the general Dark Elf playstyle, which is kind of kiting and alpha striking. They have trouble going head up with other factions, but if you're able to kind of, you know, kite, force them to overextend, alpha strike with Soul Stealer and your armor-piercing missiles, that's how Dark Elves really win at the highest level. But yeah, Rakarth, it's a shame. It's like such a cool character on paper, but yeah, if they fixed the made dragons and big monsters a little bit better overall somehow, it's a slippery slope, because doing that can be kind of toxic and make really annoying builds. But if they could make dragons a little bit more viable, then he might be okay. He might be someone we see because, you know, the beast armor is quite good. You know, and again, he's got good gooning potential, and gooning lords are quite powerful, but being on the dragon is kind of limiting. So that's your boy Rakarth. Now, last up on the list, we're going to just kind of throw them in together. We have the Dreadlord with the sword and crossbow, and we have the Dreadlord with the sword and shield. So both of them are honestly just mediocre compared to the other lord options the Dark Elves have. Yeah, you got the, you know, Foe Seeker, you have Strength through Spite, which is basically like just a haggard version of the Tomb King's buff. And the sword and board variant has like just, you know, mediocre combat augmentation abilities, right? Via the Hydra Blade as well as the Shield of Gron. So just, you know, yeah, you have the dragon mount, but again, dragons are kind of weak right now in general. A couple niche situations in which breath attacks are very good, but or if you're going for like an Air Force dominance build versus like a vampire count player or something, then they can be okay. But generally just subpar abilities, doesn't really bring too much to the table compared to the other lords we've looked at today. And the Dreadlord with the sword and crossbow is also, you occasionally see him on like a Dark Pegasus, someone trying to be real cheeky, using the volley of dark arrows to snipe artillery or characters like that, but it's just not that good, really. He has the Pearl of Infinite Bleakness, which is quite weak, as well as the Guiding Eye, which again is very, very subpar. So yeah, it's a shame. Just not great characters, the Dreadlords, and they're very cool though. The best thing they do is die in the cinematic trailers for the Dark Elves to this game, and that is their biggest accomplishment in Total War Warhammer. So that is it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this power level comparison here for these Dark Elf Lords. Hopefully the video was useful for some of you guys that are looking to be aspiring Dark Elf champions. Granted, they're one of my weaker factions, so I did have to consult some folks, including Ice Power Total War. Thank you to your insight into the Dark Elf faction. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this old Dark Elf comparison. Let me know what faction you guys would like to see next. I'm thinking about doing maybe Skaven or Bretonnia, although, yeah. You guys want to see Norska? You want to see a 2-minute video? Wolfric and then Throg. The video is done. All right, guys. Thanks again for joining. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. And my friends, we will be back with more content soon. Take care.